Hello and welcome to On the Workbench. This is part 3 of 3, the final installment on our Economics of Tool Buying series. I'm Professor Workbench, here for you for this journey. In part 3, we're going to get in the nitty-gritty, the details and the numbers about when you're buying tools. What are we really talking about? We're talking about time and we're talking about money. Money is ultimately either working for you, in other words, in making investments, or it's working against you, and that's the debt factor. When we consider compound interest and the exponential growth associated with that given enough time, you can leverage that to let it grow into substantial sums of money in your favor. To the contrary, compound interest can work against you to create a massive debt hole that it will be very difficult to get yourself out of. So when we look at investment markets and interest rates, here's some of the trends that we've been seeing over the last, well, it depends on the period here. So right now, currently, savings accounts are somewhere around 0.06% interest, which is next to nothing. The rate of inflation is higher than that, and if you just hide your money in a savings account, you're actually losing money compared to the rate of inflation, unfortunately. On the other hand, the average rate of return on market investments, NASDAQ, Dow, so on and so forth, seems to be about 7%, give or take. I mean, it's not always a perfect 7%, but it's a pretty reasonable average for what we've been seeing lately and even historically on those numbers. Personal loans, since this is money working against you, I'm going to put this in the negative. A personal loan, if you go to the bank and say, hey, I want a loan to go out and buy a toolbox or to buy whatever, is going to cost you somewhere between 4 to 25%. There's a lot of factors that go into that based on how much money you've got in the bank, your credit history, your credit score, other debts, any means that you have to secure the loan. So there's a wide range in what your actual interest rate may be. And now on a credit card, typically we're seeing about 19 to 22%, and just in my cross-reference with what Snap-on Credit is offering, that seems to be a pretty reasonable ballpark range to quote for what you might see if you're going to buy something on credit. And now this is something I want you to pay special attention to. Those payday loan stores you might see on certain street corners, those are nothing but predatory sharks. Keep away. Somewhere in the ballpark of 390 to 780% interest. And that's interest that's working against you. Those are not intended to be a long-term solution. Those are intended to be a very quick in and out means of making a payment just to get you over to that next paycheck. But if you get caught in the loop of having to pay that interest penalty, you're going to get in a massive hole faster than you will ever be able to dig. Do not do it. Never, ever, ever use a payday loan. You need to make sure your finances are set up that you have no reason to ever set foot in a payday loan store. Don't do it. There is almost no tool that you need to buy that is ever worth a payday loan. So with that being said, with money, we want to think about some long-term goals. What do we want to do with our money? We talked about setting a budget up before earlier in the series. If you haven't seen that, go back and check it out. Ultimately, you probably want to be able to support yourself and your family. You want to make sure that you got your debt paid off. If you're living debt-free, that's going to give you the freedom to do so many more things in the world and to be able to be so much more giving with your money and to be able to control your own destiny rather than being tied to simply having to pay off the debt and make those minimum payments every month. Owning a house and be able to actually have something tangible that you can put your hands on and say that's yours rather than renting. Being able to pay for your children's education. And if you want to send your kids off to college, send them off to trade school, community college, well, that's not free. And if you want to send them off to a private school to get a religious education, no, that's going to cost some money. We can do it. We just have to budget for it. And ultimately, you probably don't want to be working in this business your entire life. You're going to want to be doing something else at some point, and you need to be able to plan for your retirement. An important point, failure to plan is planning to fail. If we don't start early in planning what we want to do with our money and how we want to invest that money, we're going to fail and we're not going to be able to meet any of our long-term objectives. We'll end up not being able to cover our retirement. Our kids won't be able to go to college and have us be able to cover the cost. We'll be stuck paying off, making debt payments the rest of our life, living in a rental. With the right bit of smart money planning, we can succeed in life and get ahead. It is doable. So now this is where this might get a little wonky. I want to go through some investment and financial formulas. Now I've rewritten these formulas to be perhaps just a little more easier to understand compared to what you might see in an economics textbook. So bear with me if you're comparing this to your econ textbook. So if you want to look at what's that future value of a series of monthly payments, I've broken this down to some simple variables here for what that monthly payment amount is, the total number of months that you're going to be making payments, and the average monthly interest rate. So in other words, your APR, your annual percentage rate divided by 12, will get you that total future value of the monthly payments. So let's run through an example here. So let's just imagine that you've got a child that's, say, 2 years old. You've got a little past their birth, and you want to think about trying to put some money away for their retirement. Well, we can do that. So if we invest, let's say $60 a month, we're talking that works out to about $15 a week. And if we're getting a 15% rate of, a 7% rate of return, so 7% divided by 12 months gets us 0.583%. Now we're going to turn that into a decimal to get that a percent here whenever we put this into the formula. And so that's going to look like this. And so that means after 16 years, we're going to have $21,128 roughly available. But we only actually put in terms of dollars out of our paycheck, $11,520. And so we're seeing just a little less than $10,000 there come back that we've made in interest over those 16 years. And so if we can leverage the interest rate, this can really work in our favor. And this is how we can get ahead. So just to see what this looks like graphically, this is not a straight line. At the power of the interest rate, you can see it's a curve. And the longer you wait, and therefore the earlier you start, the greater the power of your money, combined with time, you can get ahead. Now, if you flip this in reverse, you let your debt go on too long at too high of an interest rate, and that curve's going to be working against you. So example number 2. So now let's thinking about retirement. So if we want to think about investing $100 a month, that's about $25 a week over the course of 30 years. That's 360 months. And so that $100 a month works out to about 4% per year. If you go back earlier in my series of what a mechanic might be making out of the gate, or on average. So this number may fluctuate over your career, and assume a 7% rate of return. So that 7% rate of return divided by 12 months of 0.583. We've seen this number before. Plug this into our formula. Now we're at $121,900. And we've only actually put in $36,000. So you can see a 4 times over return on investment. And here's what that curve looks like. Now, because you're not going to be pulling this money all out magically at month 361, this will still continue to grow. However, debt is really the inverse of investing. And it's going to be working against us. And in some cases, we got to watch out for various interest rates. And what is that going to do? The higher the interest rates have an exponential impact on the total repayment amount. And so let's take a look at this. I think a great example here is if we look at a toolbox. If you're watching my channel, probably like tools. And so if we look at, and I just picked out on random here, just one toolbox here on the Snap-on website. I'm trying to pick on Snap-on. We could easily done this with Mac, Matco, Cornwell, or any other tool brands. And so picked out a KRA 4813. The retail price at the time of making this video is about $2,555. Now, maybe if you've got a good Snap-on guy, you might be able to get it for a little less. And if we were to assume that you've got 48 months to pay, so in other words, 4 years, that works out to 192 weeks. And if you're buying this on credit, and let's say you get an annual percentage rate of 20%, and you got to pay sales tax on it too. Don't forget about that. And you pay 6.5% sales tax. Now, that number may vary on your locale. So how much is that toolbox going to cost you? So if we look on a weekly pay formula here, we can modify our format. We get a formula that looks like this. One of the key differences here is we're going to take our APR and divide it by 52 to get our interest rate I. And so now let's calculate that monthly payment on that toolbox. So by the time we account for 6.5% sales tax, that's going to get us about $2,700. We're making 192 payments. The weekly interest rate that comes out to 0.003486. And then that comes out to about $20 a week. So that seems pretty reasonable. Get this nice toolbox for just a touch over $20 a week. It sounds very appealing. $20 a week out of your paycheck. That's just, maybe a lunch or something. And that is well within reason for what you probably could afford out of your paycheck if you're working as a mechanic. So I can understand why this might be very tempting. But, and this is what you're probably not going to find any tool distributor tell you, and that's why I'm here to share with you the dose of reality. The total dollars spent, if you do the math on this, is $3,844.13. But that number is not what you're actually paying for it. Hold on to your seat here and watch what you're really paying for it. Okay, we're losing $1,132 to interest, but we're losing more than that. We have to consider the opportunity cost of that toolbox. Just for a good point of comparison, instead of buying that toolbox, if you took that same amount of money and decided to invest it, let's look at what that return would come out to. So we take the future value and we take this just over months, 48 months, and we combine those weekly payments. We get $80.32 a month. That works out to $4,434 is what we'd have in our investment account. And so ultimately, we can either have $4,434 in our account or be out $3,844. So that toolbox for $20 a week is really costing you $8,278.17. Now, I know the marketing shtick, it's only $20 a week, $20.08. You can do it, no big deal. But what's the alternative? If you invested that money, that net opportunity cost on that toolbox is not $20 a week. Over the course of that 48 months, $8,000 for that toolbox. That's what that really costs you. No tool guy is going to advertise this number because this is their dirty little secret that they don't want you to know, because that's how they make their money and that's how they get ahead, is by selling you tools like that. But we've got to be smart. We have to know how to play the game. So what does this do for us? What's our next step for how we can be leveraging interest and time in our favor? Well, we want to think about what are ways we can supercharge our savings. So if your employer has a 401k that has matching options that you put in a certain amount and they'll match it dollar for dollar, it's almost free money. And if you're not taking advantage of that, you're just leaving money on the table for your company to keep, and you're not putting that in your own best interest for your long-term future. Now, there are some caveats that may come with this, that you may have to spend a minimum amount of time before you're eligible. You might have to stay so long after you're eligible before you're able to keep it all in what's called a vesting period. So you have to make sure you read the fine print on what that actually entails where you work. Some states have what's generally known as a 529 college fund that has some form of tax benefits to you. I'm not sure this is always a great deal, but it's at least worth looking into. There may be some advantages, especially if your child stays in state. But if they don't stay in state, you live in a border situation, you've got alumni status somewhere else. It really depends. I'm not really sold on those 529 tax plans versus just setting up a dedicated investment account in your child's name. And so because investments are not guaranteed, they're not linear, there is some element of risk. I need to be upfront about that. And the best way you can avoid risk is to diversify. Don't put all your eggs in the same basket. When I look at things, if one piece of the market goes down, I want to make sure that I've got some investments elsewhere in other parts of the market that might be expected to go up, and vice versa. And not just by sectors, but even by geography. I want to tell you invest in America, invest in America. But in case something goes down in America, I want to have some investments that are globally diversified to be able to take advantage of global trends and global booms elsewhere in the world so that no matter what goes on, I have some way of not losing my pants in the whole mess by being well diversified. And yes, you will see short-term losses. You'll open your monthly statement or your quarterly statement and you might see that you didn't make anything that quarter. You didn't make very much as that 7% you're banking on. But that's not the goal. The goal is over time. When you look at different times of the year when different funds pay dividends, it can make a big difference into it. Certain short-term setbacks or market corrections get made up for later. Just take time, be patient, file it away, and just move on, and just slow and steady stays the course. The tortoise wins the race. That's you. You can do it. So some more personal thoughts on investments here. When you're looking at what kind of places and what kind of funds to look at, consider very low or no load mutual funds. I really like mutual funds because it's basically the diversification is done for you. That you can find funds that have groups that are, whether it's technology, healthcare, global investment, small market, large markets, technology, and there's really quite a few varieties of these all across the board to be able to fit your own interests too, and whatever diversification strategy you want to go forward with. Now, with most of these brokerage firms, you can manage them online. You don't even have to go and see a broker or go into an account, especially if you're working odd hours. You can do this just like online banking. You can set up an online account, move money over, and manage your money online. And even with the flick of a finger on your phone, you can still do it. And now I'm not getting paid for this. Let me be very clear about this. And if there are other companies that are worthwhile being on here, make sure you put a comment below in the comment section. One suggestion place for to start is Vanguard. They offer very low fees, and you can open an account with about $100 or so, give or take or less. So you don't need to have a massive amount of money saved up before you can get started investing. You want to get started early, get started often, and keep it going. One other thing when you're looking at funds, especially I know within Vanguard, some of the lower entry funds that require a lower minimum purchase price tend to be what's known as index funds. And a good example of this might be owning a fractional share of the 500 largest companies in America in what's known as the Standard & Poor's or S&P 500. So then your money is diversified across 500 companies automatically, and as that index of the market moves up and down, you're moving exactly with it, and there really is no extra strategy because S&P already modifies who's included in the S&P 500 for you. So then by owning the fund that automatically adjusts that, you're just kind of tracking the market. And we know the market historically has been moving at about 7% rate of return over time historically. And so that's an easy way to get started if you don't feel like doing the research for various funds, fund families, and keeping track of some of the other fees that go with it. Index funds are a great way to get started. And so investing is really for the long haul. Short-term losses will be there, and you may even have some short-term spikes. Those of you that have been around long enough might remember some of the dot-com bubbles in the late 90s and early 2000s that then came crashing down. If you sold that at the right time, you could have made a fortune. or you could have had some market corrections. I saw some of my pieces of my portfolio go up and then nosedive and come back, and I'm just fine. Based on your age, how many years you have towards retirement, all impact just how risk averse you might be and how you want to strategize your diversification. And just to be abundantly clear, investments are not guaranteed, and you could lose your entire investment. So a corollary to that is don't borrow money to invest. Because if you lose your money in the investment, you still owe back on the money that you borrowed. That's known as a margin trade, sort of, kind of, in an oversimplified way. So don't do that either, thinking you can beat the system by borrowing money at a lower interest rate than what you're actually making in the market. That's very dangerous. But you can lose it all. But if you balance that with the probability of success and having time on your side and history, things are going to be fine. But just be prepared for short-term losses. If you're well diversified, those losses will be of minimal impact to you. And when a loss happens, you can just kind of brush it off and go, okay, I lost something, but I didn't lose everything. So just be smart, do your research, and do what you can to minimize risk. And so with that, I hope you found this 3-part series useful. I've got another series coming up here before too long on some oil research that I've been doing lately. And if you've got some other comments about financial tips that's been useful for you, please put in the playlist below. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I'll put links for those here on the screen or in the section below. And I hope you have a great day.